Spreadsheets are really powerful when it comes to asking what-if questions. And we're going to look at a tool now that will help with this analysis of a what-if situation. I've got some data on the screen. I'm looking at having a loan from the bank, £50,000, and the interest rate is 4%, and I want to repay that over 360 months. If you've already seen my video on financial functions, then you'll understand what this function is doing. It's picking up the data and telling me that I need to make repayment of £238 a month. If you haven't seen that video, don't worry about it. You can go and look at it now, but it doesn't matter. You can manage without understanding what the function actually does. The what-if situation then is, what if I go to a different bank who's only going to charge me 3%? And of course the function will update itself and tell me that's £210. Brilliant. What happens if I want to do it back over 240 months? Different amount of repayment again. That's all very well. We're asking what-if questions, but can we remember the differences? Well, we're going to look at something called a data table that will allow you to plot these differences and see them at a glance. What we want to do is work out what we want to change in our calculations. So I want to change in the first step just the interest rate. I want to see what effect different interest rates will have on my repayment. So I need to set up a little table area. And I'm going to do it down here. And I'm just going to put various interest rates in a column down here. I'm going to start off at 1%. So I can just type 1% in there. And what I want to do is automatically fill in those details. Now we can get Excel to do that for us. So here's a little tip for you. First of all, I'm just going to change the formatting of these cells to give us 2 more decimal places. I've highlighted the cells that I want to fill, including my first number, and then I can do Edit, Fill by Series. And this allows me to add in a step value. That's the difference between each step in the series of numbers. Now I want 1/4%, which is actually 0.0025, 0.25%. And then OK. It fills in that data series for us. A data table, what that allows us to do is look at this calculation and substitute in each of these values one at a time. What you have to work out is where you want to substitute it. Well, in this calculation, it's this cell here that is the percentage. So when we do our data table, we're going to tell the computer that it's this cell that we want to substitute these values into. What has often confused people with doing data tables is the fact that it usually starts with a function here. You don't need that function. Totally ignore it. It doesn't need to be there. It's just there by way of demonstration. What you have to do is put the function in just above where you want the answers to go. We're working in a columnar way. That's vertically. So we put the function in this cell here, just above where we want the answers to go. Again, don't worry about this particular function that we're using. If you haven't already worked with them, it doesn't matter. This works on any function at all. Okay, so I'm just going to put in the function. That's my interest rate. So I'm glossing over this. Do not worry about the actual function, because this system works on any calculation you want to do. Okay, so just to keep things nice and clear, I'm going to delete that function. We don't need it. Don't want to be confused by it. There's our raw data. There's our variable interest rate. And there's our function. So what we do is we highlight the whole area that we want to complete, and then do data, drop down to table. This is a bit that can confuse people also. It's asking us for the row input cell or the column input cell. If you look at the interest rates, they're going down the column. So that means we're setting up a columnar data table. So we use the column input cell. But what is the column input cell? Well, it's that cell I told you about. Where are we going to replace these figures to? Well, we're going to replace it 1% is going to replace the 3%, then 1.25% is going to replace the 3%. So it's this cell here that these numbers will be input to. So our column input cell is therefore cell C2, and OK. OK, so there we have our data table. I'll click on it. You can see it's a table function. You don't need to worry about the format of that if you do it using the menu bar. And what that's doing is saying, taking this function and these numbers. If the interest rate is 1% and the other figures remain constant, 50,000, 250 months, then my repayments will be £229. If the interest rate is 2%, then my repayment will be £252. Each time it's taking this figure and replacing that figure with this figure in the calculation. Just run over that very, very quickly again. Let's just delete that table. There's our function, and the idea is we want to replace this cell content with these cell contents to create the table. So we select the whole area and do data, drop down to table. It's a column because our interest rates are going vertically, so it's a column input cell, and we're going to replace the 3% with these figures. And there's the answer. Now we did that as a column. You could do it across and do the rows, and you could then have a row input cell. So I'll switch the data around just to show you how that will look. The only difference, we've now got a row of interest rates. The only difference is where we put our function. The function this time is going to go to the left of where you want the answers to go. Select the whole area and do data, drop down to table. We're now in a row input cell, but it's still the same cell. It's still the interest rate that we're replacing, and OK. And there's our figures. What we've looked at is a one-dimensional data table. We can actually use a two-dimensional data table, and it's actually a lot more use, especially for this particular calculation. I'm still looking at the same calculation. I want to borrow some money. I want to know what the interest rate is, and I want to know how many repayments I'm going to make. I've put my interest rates across the top, and I've put a different amount of loan value down here. So I want to know, well, what happens if I borrow 70,000? Or what happens if I borrow 90,000? So you can see that's two-dimensional. We've got interest rates and loan value. The difference here is when we put our function in, it goes at that cell that joins the two dimensions. So that's where I've put my function. Again, don't worry about the actual function. It works with any kind of formula or function, this. So don't worry if you don't understand what payment means. So we've set up the data table, and again, we simply highlight the whole area, and then you do data, drop down to table. So it's exactly the same process, except we now need to fill in both these cells. The row input cell, what's going across the row? Well, it's the interest rate that's going across the row. What do we want to replace with 1%, 1.25%? Well, it's this number, isn't it? The 3%. So the row input cell is the interest. So it's that cell that we're replacing. Which is the column? This is the column of data. Which cell is it going to replace? It's this one, isn't it? We're going to substitute 50,000 for 10,000, then 20,000. So this is the column input cell. And then OK. And there we have our data table, two-dimensional data table set up. I now know that if I want to borrow 70,000 at an interest rate of 2%, it's going to cost me that amount per month to repay. And of course, it's all dynamic, so we can change the number of repayments, and that will be reflected in our calculations. So that is data tables.